Good evening, New Life. We are so glad that you are here for Circles tonight. My name is Pastor Justin. I'm the youth pastor here. I'm actually down in youth probably right now, but I'm grateful to be here on video and to give you guys a little bit of the teaching for our content tonight. We'll be in Psalms 126, and I really hope that discussion goes really well as we're discussing the Psalms of Ascent this month and this summer. And so as I was reading this psalm, one of the questions I was thinking to myself was, when was the time I experienced the most amount of joy? And thinking of that, that my first thought was thinking of myself as a child. When I was younger, I really was a dreamer. Life was just really exciting. And you might remember this if this was your experience, that you just have just an aspiration for life, that there's so much potential for the future, and there's no responsibility that you have as a child. It's just such a free living and joyful life. But when you become older and you grow into adulthood, as we all know, life has a way of kind of crushing our joy and crushing our dreams that we have, giving us a completely different perspective on the world than we had as a child. And, life has a way of stealing joy from us. That the circumstances that we go through in life, the struggle of daily life, losing someone we love, trying to cope with pain or loss, grieving a time of joy in life that has now been past, and leaving us in this time where we just feel just a lack of joy. And maybe all of you kind of feel in that same way, kind of that desire of wanting that there's something more, something I'm missing. And you see, when we're kids, we have this desire to dream and this desire, this hope for joy, because God's created us for joy, to be His children, to experience life and Him to the fullest and to know Him. And we're all on this journey of joy, that every day we make decisions so that we might pursue joy, that we might find joy. And maybe many of us today, if we're honest, we might admit that we've lost a certain part of our joy in life, that we have no joy and are just completely lacking because we look back to our past and there's those moments, but right now we're just really struggling. And this is kind of that experience for the psalmist in chapter 126 in the Psalms. And this is his experience, and I'm going to read it here. It says in Psalm 126, this is the ESV, "When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad." But then he turns and says in verse 4, you realize that he himself is asking God, pleading with God to restore. He says, "Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like streams in the Negeb. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him." You see, the psalmist is grieving of a time once past where God had blessed them and brought them joy. But at the time that they're writing this, he is reminding himself of God's character from the past and is pleading for God, wanting God to restore that joy, that zest for life, that sustenance that God can only give, to bring that back. And, it makes me ask this question. He's calling for joy again. He's calling for that fulfillment. What is even joy? Where does joy even come from? And we can see the psalmist is obviously turning to God for his joy. But I would describe joy as a deep sense in our soul of fulfillment and purpose. And as I said a little earlier, every day we make decisions in life that we hope will lead us down a path of joy. Decisions to make more money, experience more love, to get more attention, to feel more secure in ourselves. However, that path will take us sometimes away from God if we don't turn to Him. In fact, we often like to rush God. I can attribute this in my own life. I want God to give me and to restore me quicker than He might actually do in His timing. But maybe God wants us to slow down enough not to escape our pain or our suffering in life, but to understand that only He can be the one as our source of joy. that only in the pain and the sorrow and the grief and the struggle can we find true meaning and a deeper sense of joy. And when we pay attention to our pain, instead of rushing past it, God can bring a much greater depth in our lives through it instead of past it. When it is then we realize that maybe the joy we had as a child was actually tied to more of a shallow anchor, and God wants us to tie our joy to an anchor much more secure and much more deep than we've ever experienced before. Something that can withstand life's struggles, a joy that can't be stolen or taken from us, a joy that is anchored in God. And so thinking in application of this text and what the Psalm 126 is, I believe, pulling us to, is that we can trust God that He can and will restore. That God is a restorer and that God wants us to live a life of joy. And maybe He won't restore the life that we maybe once had, but He can restore our joy in a new and much more deeper way. Not a counterfeit joy, but a real one that's worth waiting on God and seeking Him and turning to Him. And while we're waiting for that, for God to respond and trusting in Him, we need to remind ourselves of what God has done in the past, because sometimes life can make us really question, does God really care? Does He, can He even restore? Is He capable of it? And so when we remember back to those moments where God really came through and restored, just like the psalmist did in Psalm 126, then we'll remember God's character and encourage ourselves and remind our souls that God is there and He wants to bring us joy. And when we give God our pain and our grief and our sorrow in life, we're not rushing past, trying to escape it, finding just a counterfeit ways of joy, but we really face it. We can then give it to God, knowing that God will return us to a much deeper life and to a much deeper joy. That is what the psalmist is asking for, crying out for God to restore. And so I want to encourage you tonight, when you guys go into your groups, to begin this discussion and asking and being real, where am I in this journey for joy? What am I clinging to and trusting to? Do I even have any joy in my life? And looking in this verse in Psalms 126 at what God is asking us to do, how He's asking us to turn to Him, and how He can use our pain and our struggle in life as a way for finding deeper joy and a deeper sense of fulfillment in Him. You guys have a great time in your groups. You are dismissed, I believe, at this time. And I really pray that God has great discussion planned for you.